Somebody here. Us is nas did it beep ba boop ba do boop ba boop ba ba dee 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 dee. Okay, so little peek behind the scenes. I don't generally watch these before I upload them, and I don't know how the video is going to turn out on this. But as I'm recording this, my computer is also doing a bunch of other things, and God forbid the money I spent on this thing, it could do more than one thing at a time. So it's very choppy to me as I'm recording this. If it's that bad, well, we'll all just go on with our lives, I guess. So it picks up the blah. So, happy to report that I only have about, well, with this week's, I now have about 2.5 weeks left worth of stuff. I got a lot of good reading in this week. I was had a bit of a head cold. Friday morning, I woke up and my nose was running like a faucet. Not since I'm a little kid is my nose running like that. It was literally a snot nose. I went to work and I bought a box of Kleenex, which I never do. Went through the whole goddamn thing. So I was like, you know what? I don't want to. Usually I'm over with the lady and her baby, our baby. It's mostly hers. And I didn't want to get him sick. I know he's going to have to get sick eventually. He's only 6 weeks old, but I didn't want to be the one who got him sick. So I stayed home, and then I also stayed home from work a day, which not the smartest thing to do as rent is due today. But me and smart things to do parted ways quite some time ago. But I did get a lot of reading in. Still not as much. And you know what I noticed, and I think I noticed this the last time. Either I'm burning out on comics a little bit, which happens, and or comics are just not that great. Like, I'm reading everything, and everything that's coming out monthly is mostly good. There's a lot of stuff that I was like, you know what, I don't really need to keep buying this book, which is, I guess, a good thing about this sort of thing. But it also just kind of like, nothing really was super exciting. I don't know. I'll talk about a couple things that I read this week on top of what I picked last week. But yeah, I just want to. Honestly, the best part about getting all this reading done was just the stack wasn't so that it was going to tip over at any moment. But still not picking like any Marvel stuff because I don't want to spoil anything. Oh no, indie books. God forbid. They're all basically superhero. No, they're not. First up, I got Black Tape #1 from Artists, Writers, and Artisans, if I'm not mistaken. That's what AWA stands for. This is written by Dan Panosian, who's who is more of a penciler. He's more of an artist. Incredible artist, too, I might add. And I might have said as much before. I feel like I'm mixing him up with somebody else. Panosian back in the 90s had a very similar style to Todd McFarlane. Now I definitely have to look this up because otherwise I'm going to feel like a right tit. Hopefully this is still recording. Thrill as he looks up things. Yeah. Back in the 90s when Todd McFarlane was writing and drawing Spawn, he still writes it, I'm pretty sure, but he hasn't drawn it for a long time. And Panosian was who he handpicked to replace him as artist. And I, as a 14-year-old boy, was like, ugh. For one thing, the book wasn't that good. And even at that, I was probably closer to 15. I was already kind of losing my taste for 90s superhero comics, which I now read ironically, because that's the kind of insufferable prick that I am. So yeah, Panosian was tapped to fill in, and it was because he drew a lot like Todd McFarlane, but it was a piss poor substitution in my 15-year-old estimation. Years go by, and I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way he developed his own style, and now he looks a little more like John Romita Jr., but he doesn't look close enough to be like, oh, he's, you know what I mean. Back in the early '90s, everyone drew like Todd McFarlane because he made a gajillion dollars drawing the way he did, and that was the point, was to make a living, a comfortable living, mind you. But nowadays, he's also writing stuff. He wrote a book last year, year before, called An Unkindness of Ravens, which was pretty good. And I think he's got another book going right now, in fact. But it's kind of a drag that he's not drawing. He did draw the cover, though, which is great. And Dalibor Talajic, who is a Croatian artist who's done a lot of work for the Marvel Comics group, is on art duties, and he's great. So this will be fun. I think this is like Dalibor is another guy that AWA is kind of trying to bring over from Marvel. Good luck to him because he's great. I do believe it's also Satanic, which is another draw for me. I want to say, from what I read the solicit, and I want to say something like a tape, like a demo tape that's possessed by the devil or something. I don't know. I don't want to know going in. So there. Speaking of artists that I like a lot, I also got Where Monsters Lie, #1, from the good people at Darking Horse Comics. This is written by Kyle Starks, who wrote a book called The Rock Candy Mountain back, a while ago. He also currently is writing the book Fuck This Place, which is known by its more G-rated title, I Hate This Place. But I've made it a point to only buy the Fuck This Place variant because I'm a big believer in the F word. This is, though, and I mean, Kyle Starks aside, because Fuck This Place is really good. But Peter Kowalski is who I'm here for. I know I've mentioned Peter Kowalski on this here show before. I don't know. This was my pick for the shop, and the way I described his art was, I think I brought it was John Severin. If John Severin and John Romita Jr. had a baby that was exposed to a lot of Steve Dillon in the womb, maybe not a lot of Steve Dillon, but there's just like a dash of Steve Dillon in there. And needless to say, first of all, it's a brilliant comparison, if I do say so. And those are all artists that I really liked too. So yeah, Kowalski's great. He did, I first became aware of him. He did a book with Joe Casey called Sex, which I'm sure I've mentioned also. It was Joe Casey's Batman. It was his own version of Batman, and there was sex in it. That was the thing. It was Joe Casey's the kind of asshole, and I mean that in a kind way. I don't know him well enough to say that without offense, but I don't mean it with offense. Joe Casey's the kind of asshole who would name a comic book Sex in order to get people to buy it. And it works. It worked on me, but it was just a really good book. It was, it wasn't super obviously a Batman pastiche, but I mean, the evidence, the clues or whatever were clear enough to me. But really, it was Casey trying to do like a realistic, billionaire vigilante, and it was pretty good. And there was fucking in it, but it really wasn't. Despite the name of the book, it wasn't the central thing. Like there's around the same time, Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky did their book called Sex Criminals, which very much had to do with sex. Also did not much care for it. I'm the only one I know who doesn't like that book, though, so it's definitely on me. And I really enjoy the work of both those guys. That was the first thing Zdarsky did that I read, and I didn't really like hold it against him because he was just the artist. But I remember at that point I was kind of getting over Matt Fraction and his stupid hair and bracelets. Walking around looking like Johnny Depp back then, it was embarrassing for everyone. But yeah, Sex had sex in it, but it was really more about a guy trying to get out of the vigilante Kowalski's also done. He did a book a couple years ago called "Join the Future." In fact, that was one of the books that was interrupted by COVID. Um, he did another one shot for Aftershock, an oversized one that I can't remember the name of now. He's done stuff that I've missed, which is weird because I usually uh, buy anything he does. But that's the other thing, is that I generally follow writers, and so like if I click on something and I don't recognize the writer's name, I generally don't even look at the artist's name. But I think it's also the fact that Kowalski's done a lot of stuff that's kind of just outside, something that I probably wouldn't even think to look at. But that's, that's my problem, I guess, not yours. You just came for picks of the last week. So first up, Magic Order 4, number 1. I read this and I was like, huh? I had no idea what was happening. And I was like, but I just read all of these like a few weeks ago, and maybe I'm just, my mind is like a sieve. But no, it turns out I just hadn't read the previous issue. I've gone on this rant before, so I will not do it again. But renumbering at number 1 every time is already annoying enough for a litany of very nerdy reasons that I'm not going to get into here. But when Magic Order 3 number 4 comes out, and then 3 weeks later Magic Order 4 number 1 comes out, that's Magic Order 5. Or whatever the fuck number it's actually on. This is the 4th series. Let me think. 3 series, I believe, of 6 issues each. That is... No, it's 18. So this is Magic Order number 19 as far as I'm concerned. And if they didn't pull shit like that, I wouldn't accidentally read it before I read the previous issue. I did eventually work my way down in the stack to the previous issue. And then I read this again, and it all made much more sense. Again, that's like... It's not. They're not doing it... I don't want to get into it, but boy, it's annoying, that sort of shit. Also, I read Justice Society of America 1 and 2. These are fun. I think I'm gonna keep up with this book. There's very few DC books that I give a shit about. That's almost always been the case, but these days more than ever. And Justice Society is not what I would call an A-list book. I think I did misspeak last week. Hey, I'm a poet and I didn't even realize it. So here you have Alan Scott, Earth 2 Green Lantern, and then you have Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash. Alan Scott was also the Golden Age Green Lantern. And you have Hawkman, and I believe that's Connor Hall was the Golden Age and Silver Age Hawkman. And I'm pretty sure those are the only guys. I don't think Superman or Batman were ever on the Justice Society, nor Wonder Woman. But a lot of, like, you have the original Sandman, Dr. Midnight is on here, Dr. Fate. This, like, so far they're trying to find Dr. Fate. The Huntress, well, that's the other thing. So the Huntress is a character that's been in the Batman pantheon since I was a kid in the 90s. I don't remember her deal, but, it seemed like, especially back then, anybody that shook hands with Bruce Wayne then eventually became a masked vigilante on their own. This Huntress is the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, the Catwoman, and she comes from the future to try to find Dr. Fate, and that's more interesting to me. A point of view character who's like a brand new character, but still a recognizable name. I like it. I'm into it. And then, speaking of which, I read a bunch of books, like I said, this week. And I know I was just saying that overall it was kind of not disappointing, but not super exciting. But these were books that I read that I did want to share with you, my loyal viewership. This is Batman Fortress number 8. This was a great series. I just said that I buy books for writers, but there are artists and there's probably, now that I'm thinking about it, there's probably just as many artists that I buy comics. Like, if I see their name on it, I go, oh, I'm buying that. In my head, I do that with writers, because I too am a writer. And as much as I love the art and comic book art, the stories are always what I'm a story junkie. But Derek Robertson is definitely one of the artists that I follow. He drew Transmetropolitan with Warren Ellis, and then my favorite comic book of all time, The Boys, with Garth Ennis. Well, he co-created The Boys with Garth Ennis. He drew, I want to say, half of it. Not even half of it, maybe a little more than half of it. but not a lot of it, unfortunately. But this was great, and this is another book that I also feel like, not like Justice Society, but this really should have been an Elseworlds. Elseworlds, I don't know if I've ever brought this up. Elseworlds is DC's What If. What If is Marvel's like, oh, then this, what happens if the Punisher's family doesn't die, or what happens if Peter Parker becomes the Punisher, stuff like that. All these alternate timelines and universes and stuff. And DC's version of that, starting in the 90s, was Elseworlds. I want to say the Doom That Came to Gotham is the first one, or it could be Gotham by Gaslight. Pretty sure it's a Batman one. Now, not all of them are good. In fact, I do remember talking about Elseworlds on this here program a couple years back, because I had gotten my hands on one that sucked. But for whatever reason, I mean, and that was when I worked at the shop back in San Diego. We couldn't keep them in the store, and a lot of them are well out of print, and are therefore a little more expensive. And even then, some of them are, like I say, stink, but some of them are really good. Speeding Bullets, which is an Elseworlds wherein Clark Kent does not land in Smallville, Kansas, but in fact in Gotham City. Then he's adopted by Thomas and Martha Wayne. So then he becomes Batman, but he's got Superman's powers. Superman Red Son is probably the most well-known one. That's the one where Superman, instead of landing in Kansas, he lands in the USSR in the 50s. Or the 30s, I guess, yeah. And by Mark Millar, that was actually, I think that was probably Mark Millar's big break, or one of them anyway. So fun stuff, great stuff, fun stuff. But for whatever reason, they stopped using that imprint a while back. Now, this isn't to say that they always use that imprint, because, well, I guess there wasn't an Elseworlds during The Dark Knight Returns. But I remember being at a DC panel once when I was in high school, and they said, oh, Dark Knight's more like an Elseworlds, which drew a lot of murmurs and boos. So the story of this, I don't want to give too much away, but the story in this is aliens are invading. I think I talked about the first issue. Aliens are invading the Earth, and Superman is nowhere to be found. So Batman puts together a ragtag group, including Lex Luthor, of all people, to help break into the Fortress of Solitude to try to find where Superman could be. And this is the shocking conclusion, as the cover denotes. But yeah, it takes a big left turn in Act 3 of this issue, and it's clearly an alternate timeline. Like, it's not canon, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But that's what I mean. It's like, you couldn't slap an Elseworlds on this. Just the logo. And that's it. I mean, it could partially be that, because the Elseworlds books were, generally speaking, in fact, all of them, I think, were prestige one-shots. So they were square-bound, and they were a little more expensive. They never did like a series like this. Marvel did a similar thing, I remember, in the late aughts, I want to say, called Bullet Points, which I want to say was written by Straczynski or possibly Mark Waid. And it was definitely a what if. Like, it was everything, it was a retelling of events in the Marvel Universe, but with very different, where like Reed Richards ends up the cigar-chomping one-eyed leader of S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuff like that. But they didn't call it What If either. And that's sort of, I was like, all right. I mean, it doesn't matter. None of this matters. But I feel like DC does shit like this all the time, where they're like, people don't want Elseworlds. And it's like, I don't think that's right. I think people do want Elseworlds. I think they stopped selling as well, for one thing, because you're putting out crappy ones, and for another thing, just, people lose interest. But I mean, now, with all these guys who grew up reading Elseworlds in the 90s are still buying comics. They want to read them. I want to do it. I don't want to do it. All right. I don't know why I didn't pull this earlier, because this was my pick for the week that it came out at the shop. This is Black Cloak #1. This is by Kelly Thompson and Meredith McLaren. And I did not know anything about it. I knew it was some sort of fantastical thing. But it's, again, you smash anything together with noir sensibilities, and I'm all on board. So this is a magical fantasy book, but it's also very much a private eye, renegade cop sort of book, and I am super into it. I hope this really holds up. I have no reason to think it won't, because Kelly Thompson is a great writer. I haven't read all of her Captain Marvel run, largely because I'm just not super into Captain Marvel, at least not Carol, who I don't dislike. For one thing, Monica Rambeau is my Captain Marvel. Very few people will make that claim, I think. But her Black Widow I raved about with Elena Casagrande. The Carmen Carnero issues of Captain Marvel I did read, and those were incredible. Kelly Thompson, I go back with her to A-Force, which was an all-female superhero team, and it was really, really good. And it was one of those books, too, where I knew it was like, man, this isn't going to last a year. But it should have. I mean, there's a lot of those books where I can tell they're not going to last a year. If something happens and they hit, then sure, they'll last longer, but that just doesn't. Usually that's kind of part and parcel. When I recognize something is not going to last long, part of the reason it's not going to last long is because it's a little too off kilter for your average dopes. I also think there's like, I often forget this, that a lot of Marvel guys, which I would count myself as, buy the big ones. They buy Avengers, they buy X-Men, they buy Thor, they buy Iron Man, they buy Wolverine. I like the little, and I buy all that stuff too, but I like the littler teams and the littler books. And you can't buy them all, God knows. Although I certainly will come close at times. But, yeah. This is all to say that I like Kelly Thompson's work. And I'm really pulling for her because this is creator owned, and so if this is a hit, it'll be not only more creatively fulfilling, I would think, but a little more financially fulfilling. And I don't want to jinx this, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but it's been an unfortunate trend in indie comics over the last few years, especially with Image, which is almost weird to call an indie book. Just because it's not Marvel or DC is the main reason. But, I mean, Image is a huge publisher now. It's not this fly-by-night. It's been around 30 years now. So, the unfortunate thing is that there have been tons of books that come out from Image, and I get super stoked on them first issue or two, and then they just go, and I have no idea why that is. I don't want to name names, but a lot of books that I've talked about on here and have raved about, 6 months later, I'm like, this book sucks now. And I have no reason to think that this will happen with this book, but I really hope it does. Not just because I like Kelly Thompson, but because I like this book. I want it to continue to be good. Call me crazy. All right. I've been on way too long. Again, I really hope this video works out, because watching myself as I'm recording this, it's like I'm recording this in 2003. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Then none of you would have to watch it.